Hello and good morning, everyone. Only positivity here. I have my coffee with me, ready to kick off the sixth podcast on this playlist that I'm looking to launch called Elevated Thoughts. So, before diving into the content and everything itself, just what I'm doing here is, as I look to, pursue knowledge and life experience, in this phase of life through photography, fitness, one of the habits that I've really been forming is reading. So, essentially, this podcast is going to be going through some of the books I've been reading, taking away the lessons learned and applying them to experiences in my life. So before going into the material for today, I like to start off with a story. I guess I feel like that's been working over the past few. So I don't know if any of you have been getting calls or like spam calls, right? So now our iPhones and whatnot can identify a scam to some regard, where it says scam likely when you get a phone call from a number that you don't recognize, right? So over the past few months, I had been getting calls about my student loans. And saying that there's lower rates, you can refinance, things like that, or there's some kind of issue like with the IRS that you have to contact an agent and like get that all squared away. So obviously those are all scams. So, but every now and then I'll entertain it. So um, there was one particular time where after a series of getting these calls, very very frequently over a few days, I was like, what, I'm just gonna pick up. I think I'm just gonna pick this one up. So I get a call from a number that I don't recognize, and I pick up, and the representative is like, a Filipino dude on the other side of the phone, and he's like, sir, uh, there's an issue with your student loans, and he might have been a Russian Filipino because that accent I just did sucked. So I was like, oh man, like, can you help me fix it? And he's like, sure, sir. And then he connects me to another Filipino dude. Okay, so um, I'm going through this, and like I'm entertaining this. I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much for calling me. I really need to get this squared away. Please help me, And I was like, sir, no problem. We'll get it fixed right now. So he goes, the first thing I'll need is your social security number. I'm like, okay, definitely. So then I go, um, okay, are you ready? Like I'm like I'm building the suspense here, right? I'm like ready to go. I'm like, are you ready? He goes, yes, sir, I'm ready. And I think he's like, getting excited. He's like, I'm about to scam this fool. And then so I go, okay, ready? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. And then then it gets really quiet, and he's like writing it down. You can tell in the middle of him like typing this out, his typing starts slowing because he's catching on to like, the bullshit that I'm saying. So then um his tone immediately changes. And so like mind you, this guy's trying to scam me, right? So he gets like pissed. So I go, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. And he goes, "Oh, you motherfucker fuck face." And I was like, "Dude, what?" And he's like, and then he starts swearing at me like crazy, He like goes in on me. And I'm like, "Dude, how mad can you be at me when I know you're sitting there trying to scam me, right? Don't be mad that I entertain this." And at the end I was like, "Psych." But anyway, so yeah, that was a fun conversation for me, and I feel like, maybe I deserve that. Because I do that in a lot of facets, right? So um, a real quick story, like another one is when so my college will call me a lot, and it's from a different number every time, but it says like Chicago, Illinois. So I'm like, okay, let me pick this up because it might be like for a job I applied for, or something related to something pertinent. Okay, so um, when I get these calls, they'll be like, hey, is this so and so? And they'll say my name, and I'll be like, it is. And they'll be like, oh, this is your university, right? Like, so then you're like, oh shit. So, so every now and then I'll listen to the spiel, right? And they'll be like, is this so and so? And then I'll be like, no, you know what? Wait, I'll go get him. And then then I like wait a second, and then I'll be like, then I'll go. I always go with the Indian accent because that's what I know best. And I'll be like, oh, hello. And they'll be like, hi, this is so and so calling from your university. And I'll be like, so I go to the bathroom, right? When I go, nothing comes. Nothing comes. I try everything. I try fiber. I try Metamucil. I drink water every day. Nothing comes. And then they're like, are like, oh, sir, I don't know what to do. I don't know. And they hang up on me. And I'm like, you know what? That to me is a win, right? Because those telemarketers are paid to like stay on the phone with you. But when they hang up on me, I'm like, I deserve an award for this because my acting skills are pretty much impeccable at that point. So anyway, I thought those were a couple fun stories to share. It's always kind of fun to mess around with those telemarketers. In a lighthearted way. So I'll leave it at that. Um, so coming back to elevated thoughts here, right? The book that we've been going through. So we finished the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, and we moved on to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And so part one. Was last week's podcast, and today we're just going to go a little bit deeper for part two. So, this book's all about being present in the moment, right? Not dwelling on the past or the future, but being here now. And one thing I always like to mention is that some of these things are very high level in nature that the authors go through, but some are you might already know them, but when they're phrased through the author's lens, it it clicks in a different way. And I think that's one thing to know because that really resonates when you hear someone else process common knowledge, right? And that's what makes us different. So the first thing that Eckhart Tolle goes into in this part two that I'm going to be talking about is emotion. Okay, so he outlines emotion as arising at the place where the mind and the body meet. So he states emotion is your body's reaction to your mind. So we tie that to an example. So let's talk about, a fight type thought or a frustrated thought, um, eventually building up into an emotion that we know as anger. Okay, so this is not an exact direct correlation, but I like to relate it back to my parents, right, and how they channel emotion. So, let's say my mom wants to ask me something simple, like what do you want for dinner when you come, or can we go out for dinner here instead of here today, or can you come at this time instead of this time, right? So. Um, Sometimes, my mom won't directly say it to me and just get it off her chest. She'll sit on something for weeks, right? She'll sit on something like, oh, hey, can you come to this auntie's house? And she won't just say it to me, um, like in a text, or she won't just call me and say it when it's on her mind. She'll wait, and because she wants me to go to this function so badly, when I get home, she goes into this whole dialogue on, why that auntie is important in my life, why I should go to that party, why it would make sense for me to go to that party. And it's interesting that she's just been sitting on that for so long, right? Sitting on that thought for so long. And I think we see this with a lot of like, especially older Indian people where, they can't just explicitly say something that is different from what you're thinking because they think that you might take it wrong. And then when they're weird, it makes me weird too, right? So, not a direct correlation there, but I think it's just one example to note, right? And you know, Eckhart Tolle goes deeper into the book when he says strong emotions are even known to alter our biochemistry and even change the balance in our body. And I think one classic example of that is stress acne, right? Like, I'm 28. I'm definitely past the point of puberty and whatnot. But when there are stressful times, not for a while, sometimes I'll get like a stress sit on my forehead because like there's too many pieces moving at once, or I'm too worried about something like that. And that happens to even my mom often, right? When she's worried about something, her you can see it take a toll on her body, right? Her immune system starts to weaken a little bit. She gets sick. She starts sniffling, things like that. She just gets tired more often. And I think like those are some real examples of how stress is not only emotion related, it can also affect our biochemistry and our physical functions as well. So um, I think he goes further, right? We talked about incessant thinking in the last podcast and how that constant mental traffic can really wear us down. So um, emotions are associated with that incessant thinking, right? So as our emotions become stronger, so do those incessant thinkings, our judgments, our feelings, our emotions. The more powerful that emotional energy is, um, the more powerful those downstream effects on your body will manifest. So we move on from this incessant thinking and letting emotions control and dictate our actions, and we move on to love, joy, and peace, right? So all of these things, Eckhart Tolle outlines and says that these are all things that are developed through intensely being here now and being conscious. So he says that, and I don't know if I agree with this 100%. He says that emotions are subject to that law of opposites, right? So emotions are constantly wrapped up. That's what it means to me in that pleasure and pain cycle, right? Um, so we're seeking out the pleasure because of our emotions, and when we don't get it, it turns into pain. Okay, and so he states that there's no opposites to love, joy, and peace. And I'll go into why that is a little bit deeper, or why he says that is a little bit deeper. I think there could be opposites to it, but I'll just go into his commentary a little bit later. So a really good example of this to me is like who here knows um, someone, right, who is on that inspirational kick, right? They're posting inspirational and motivational quotes because they're riding some kind of high right now because something good happened to them, right? Um, so like for example, like there's often people posting quotes of, never give up, with like a background of a lion, and that somehow resonates with them, and that somehow, I guess, illustrates the wavelength they're on and that mood they're in right then. But who knows, a similar person, that same person who at the drop of a hat can become depressed and also have a negative outlook as well if there's a certain external negative stimulus, right? So let's say I got a promotion, right? And I'm happy now, I'm posting motivational quotes, right? Like trust the process, all these things. But at the same time, let's say I get more work because of this promotion, or let's say, I don't know, I pop a flat tire on my way home after receiving that news, and my whole outlook on life changes. I'm like, damn it, like I popped my tire, my day sucks now. That's the polar opposite of the feeling that I just had when I got that promotion, right? So I'll definitely include myself in this bracket, at times. So I used to have hundreds and hundreds of those exact type of quotes on my phone, right? There would be those quotes that you see on Instagram, like, I don't need my own best friend. I'm my own best friend. And there'd be a picture of, some dude lifting weights in the background, or some dude with a serious look, and I'd be like, man, that's me, dude. I don't need a best friend. I'm my own best friend. Um, but then at the same time, like, 20 minutes later, I'd be like, I want a best friend. Like I need a best friend, things like that. And like it's a fake image of happiness and tranquility, right? It might resonate with you right in that moment, but if it's not part of your personality, or if you are prone to, your emotions, that feeling is going to go away as soon as a negative stimulus enters your realm. So, um, I don't want to shit on my mom a lot, but I love her, but I think like she's a good example of some of these things, and how I've kind of dove into emotional intelligence based on some of my parents' actions, and whatnot. So, going back to an example, so when the kids are home, when me and my brother are home, or like our significant others are home, there's a lot of young kids in the house. She's happy, right? She and like her friends are in the house. She's like the belle of the ball, right? She's like the social butterfly, and I love seeing her like that. I love seeing her happy. I love seeing her smile, right? But let's say there's something on her mind. Something happened. Let's say I couldn't make it that day, right? Let's say, maybe someone else who was close to couldn't make it that day. She gets stressed out, right? It totally dwindles her mood, and she's a little bit removed or reserved during these functions. And to me, that's interesting, right? Because I think real tact, and emotional awareness comes from being content in all situations, right? If you if your composure evaporates during a tough situation, then your emotions have taken over, and you really can't claim emotional intelligence. And I think one thing I've learned from, like, I guess reading the Gita and stuff like that is that being at these polar opposites, like, being very happy versus being very sad, is almost unhealthy, right? It goes through these peaks and troughs, and I think the real tact, like I said, and the real art comes in when you can maintain that contentment, right? When you can maintain that flat line of being content no matter the situation, no matter the stimulus, no matter the environment that you're in. So, revisiting uh, pleasure, joy, love, and peace, right? So Eckhart Tolle states that he talks about a couple, right, who after their honeymoon phase begins to experience real issues, right? After that initial period of euphoria, the couple begins to oscillate between love and hate. So I've seen this a lot of times with relationships, with people around me, and whatnot. You're so happy with a person you meet in the beginning, right? You're going out drinking, you're spending a lot of time with them, they're perfect. You're almost more accountable to yourself to be good for that person. Um, and I think, relating this back to Indian culture, I think that honeymoon phase is very much so elongated, right? So let's bring it back to like a granular example. So like in the traditional sense, a um, let's use a man and a woman. So in a traditional Indian family, the family is so heavily involved in the couple's actions and their lives and things like that. So that can often be forgetful, or it can be kind of thrown under the radar or under the carpet to actually get to know the person that you're going to eventually marry. So you know we 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 place a lot of emphasis on how much our family will like our significant other and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's you're the one who's living with that person. But I'll get off that background or that level set. So um, I think Indian people, it's often years before they even live together, before they spend extended time periods together, right? So before you're married, you're usually hanging out in a friend group setting or a family setting. You're not in each other's space, right? So and when you're with family, you have to act a certain way. You have to act very proper. You can't let your guard down when you're in front of family and you're actually not in the family yet, right? So you're seeing a different view of the person you're going to marry before you actually marry them. And that to me was one thing that didn't really jive with me, which is why, I told, my fiance that we need to live together for a little bit before we can get married, because I need to see the little quirks and things like that if it's going to work when it's just you and I in a space. So um, I think that going back to the traditional Indian couple, I think they will figure out those quirks, right? And it's not the wrong way to do anything by any means. They will figure out those quirks after they get married, right? And often, and in my experience, the first few years of marriage might be tough because now you have a home together, you're getting acquainted to each other's living styles, you're actually getting acquainted to being in someone else's space intimately for an extended period of time. You can't just say, okay, look, we had a bad experience at dinner today. We might have got into an argument. I'm just going to go home, reset, and then I'll see you again in a few days, right? That is no longer an option, right? You have to find a way to squash your problems in a more expedited manner and in a more mature manner, right? You can't just wait till you're calm and then approach the person. You might have to hash it out then, and that's where enhanced communication skills come into play. Can I understand where my partner is coming from? Can she understand where I'm coming from? Are we playing the tally game? Like I won this one, you won that one. So things like that you have to be aware of as you come into someone else's space. So coming back to love, joy, and peace, and I think that going back to that law of opposites that applies to emotions, Eckhart Tolle says, real love and real joy does not make you suffer, and I agree with that, right? Because that initial euphoria honeymoon phase, it could be true love, but there's also a good chance that it's not, right? Real love doesn't suddenly turn into hate, right? If you truly love someone, I feel, even if your romantic paths don't align and somehow you guys split, you should still want the best for that person. Because, like he says, true love doesn't just turn into hate overnight. Real joy doesn't just suddenly turn into pain, right? When you experience true joy from something, um, there can't be any way that it turns into pain or a negative type of activity if it is true joy indeed. So we go into drugs, right? And that's what Eckhart Tolle does in this next section. So anyone who's ever taken drugs, right? Like, and not even let's like not even talk about hard drugs. Let's talk about drinking, right? Maybe drinking to alleviate pain. You know that after a little while, you're gonna come down from being drunk, and then at some point, that pleasure is gonna turn into pain. Okay? So I know a lot of people who come alive when they're drunk, right? They're antisocial when they're sober, but when they're drinking, they want to get on the phone, they want to socialize, they want to go out in public. Um, but when they're sober, they're just antisocial, mean, lazy, right? So the lesson learned from that is that numbing yourself is never going to bring you true happiness, right? It might put a band-aid over it for a couple hours, for a couple of days, but numbing yourself is not the way. Okay? So um, and going back to my personal my personal brand and the things I advocate, right? So I advocate marijuana use. I don't see it as a bad thing, but I will never tell someone to use it as a solution to their problem, right? It can be used for that same numbing effect, and we can see it from that example of that classic stoner profile, right? Someone who just comes home, you know blazes up, just watches TV and eats and is pretty much incapacitated, right? And I think that's one of the main reasons that marijuana got a bad rep in the beginning. But in reality, right, marijuana can do that to people. It can do those negative things to people. But for some people, like me, I use it very differently, right? And I'm not ashamed to say that I might have used marijuana to escape from my problems, right? But slowly, though, with a substance like marijuana, you realize that, like, even if you didn't want to, at least for me, right? You're gonna start reflecting about things in your past and some of your trauma and things like that, right? And that's what marijuana did for me. Um, when I would use it, I would always find myself thinking about the things that I would get upset about. What should I have gotten upset about that? Was that something that really like altered my biochemistry and made me frustrated? Or was it something that I didn't need to get upset about? And so I do that post-mortem on I used to do that post-mortem on all my interactions. And then when I like now that I don't use it, right, as often, I'm able to apply that methodology to my day-to-day actions. Okay, with this stimulus, how am I going to react? It's almost a game to keep your emotional intelligence now through that reasoning. But going back to the main point, numbing yourself is never a solution to a problem. It's just temporary suppressing. So, the next point we go into here that Eckhart Tolle outlines is most of the pain that we have today is self-inflicted. So we talk about why people get angry or sad. What are some triggers? Okay, so some triggers could be traffic, situations at work, parents, friends, significant others, and related issues. But one thing that Eckhart Tolle goes into, and is also in the Gita, is that we get upset because we cannot accept a fact or we can't accept what is, right? So let's say, for example, if like a flower, right? A flower that is blooming beautifully, a rose, but somehow someone comes by and steps on it, right? That flower is not going to get mad. It's just going to grow in the way that it now has to, given the fact that it was stepped on, right? So he uses a quote that's really good. That is it goes, look, something along the lines like, look how the flowers sway. They neither toil nor spin, I believe that is. And basically what that comes back to for me is look how the flowers sway, right? He says, look how they move back and forth. They're not upset, um, they're not frustrated by their actions, right? Or by the way the world is manipulating their actions, right? They're accepting what is, and all they can do is move forward through accepting what is, right? And that might have not have been the best example, but when I get to that part in the book, I'll dive into that example a little bit further. But I think one thing that is important to do is always, quote unquote, solutionize, right? We need to realize that the present moment is all we ever have, is all we're ever going to have. We can pay brief visits to the past, but we use it for the lessons learned and then we move on, right? Nobody needs to live in the past because that will ultimately bring you pain. So the first step to doing this is acceptance. Accept every situation for what it is, and then realize the control that you had in that situation, right? Um, when you accept and then you act as if you had chosen that situation, right? Take accountability for it. So a lot of high level stuff there. So for example, I think about work interactions all the time, right? I work with a lot of personalities on my day to day, but one thing I think that is very very important to do is take accountability for all your interactions. Okay, so if an interaction didn't go so well with my parents at work, with my fiance, I'm going to take accountability for that. It might not have been all my fault, but did I do everything I could do to make that interaction go smoothly? Did I do everything on this project to set me up for success? Did I give my best in this effort? That is being very, very present, being alert, being now, taking responsibility, right? I surrender to the moment as if I had chosen that. And if I had chosen it, I'm going to do my best to get that task done, to perform at my highest level. Okay? I could either be a victim of that situation or I'm going to take charge. So, I think one thing to, and this might be an erroneous example, um, is I relate this back to my parents a lot, right? And it's something that I've been doing over the past few years, just reflecting on my relationship with my parents. Um, so I also look to my fiance and her relationship with her mom. Okay, so my fiance and her mom are best friends. And, and I used to always get very interested by people who were very you know cordial and jovial and almost best friend like with their parents because I was never like that. The last thing I wanted to do was hang out with my parents on a Friday night. But that's what my fiance wanted us to do. She wants to hang out with her mom on a Friday night, which is very interesting to me. And I used to get mad about that as I reflect. I used to be like, man, why? I just, I want to be close with my parents. I want to hang out with them. Like I want to, go do things with them. But sometimes I realize that it's about accepting the situation, right? Like my parents are different. They're not really into that friendship type of relationship with their kids. And I think it's about accepting that, right? They've done the best they can with the way they were raised, with the cards they were dealt, right? And I would say their parents really didn't show them that love and affection and that friendship type relationship to have with their kids. So how would they even know? How would they learn? So all I can do is accept them for what they are, and that to me is taking accountability on my end. I could get frustrated, but what's that going to do? I can take accountability. I can do my best to be close to them, but at the end of the day, I'm doing my best, and I can't worry about the end result. So, just a little tangent there. We go into the next point, which is becoming self-aware, right? Everyone, I believe, needs to start becoming self-aware. Recognize your emotions and start pointing them out. So bring that back to me. If I'm having a bad day and I'm starting to feel irritable or frustrated, I'm gonna call myself out and say, "Hey, look, you're pissed off today, um, and you're not wrong for it. You're okay. You're okay being pissed off." But now what I do is I'm frustrated, okay, and I've accepted that. So now that I've accepted that truth, if me sitting in that pain is is crazy, right? It's me sitting and enjoying that pain or just like lounging around is masochistic, right? It's me seeking out pain, and that's crazy. So now that I'm able to accept the fact that I'm frustrated, I can start remediating. And one example I like to use is going to the DMV, right? So if you want to test a patience, I would say go ahead and roll up to the DMV. Um, so um, if you're waiting for an extended period of time, at any point you're going to start to get into deeper thoughts. You might get frustrated, things like that. Secondly, the staff there isn't always friendly, and no, nor do they always have the appropriate answer for you. So it's going to be easy to get frustrated with the people there. They're curt, they're short, they're rude sometimes, and even unhelpful. So I think one way for me to take accountability in that action is like, okay, I'm there and I'm gonna have to wait, right? So I can either be frustrated by that, I can bring a book so that I'm occupied during that time. I can do something positive, so that way I actually gain something out of the interaction, or I can just be content with the fact that I have to wait because that's no one's fault. Another thing I can do is be polite, right? I can try my best to guide that interaction. Okay, so I can say, hey, how was your day? I can try to set that situation up like we're going to solve the problem together. If I need a new license, renew my registration, let's solve this together. If I can do anything to streamline this interaction, please let me know. So I'm gonna then really get a gauge of their receptiveness to all that positive energy. So if they're not receptive to it, I'm gonna accept that. Okay, this person is not really jiving with my personality. I'm still gonna be positive with them, but I'm gonna accept that this is the way the interaction is gonna go. And then once I realize that, it becomes positive, right? It becomes a game. How can I pull the best interaction out of this person, right? But going forward to that interaction, as I leave the DMV, I could be stressed about that interaction, right? Oh man, why was this person rude? Um, but it's in my control to do my best during that interaction, and it's like, hey, look, I did my best to be kind and friendly to you, and it's almost your loss if you don't want to engage with me because I'm emanating nothing but positivity. Secondly, as I leave, now that I did my best in that interaction, I don't let it affect the rest of my day. I might come home to my fiance and be like, dude, I was dealing with this crazy ass lady at the DMV, and it was just interesting, right? I tried my best to be friendly with her, but she just wasn't having it, right? But me coming home and letting that negativity affect my energy, and that in turn affect my fiance's energy, would not be fair to her, right? Because she wasn't even in that interaction either. So the point of it all is, I'm gonna do my best to recognize the times where I could be inflicting that type of pain on myself, where I could be carrying around negative baggage with me. And I'm just going to drop it, right? I'm going to process it, accept that it was a negative interaction, that I did my best in it. I'm going to leave it at that. Okay? So, Eckhart Tolle, he goes further into saying that we have to be careful about this, right? Because pain has a tendency to seek out more pain unconsciously. So, um, because we don't go out and seek out pain because that would be crazy. I mean, unless there are crazy people that go seek out bad interactions and fights with people. So I want you all to think about anyone that you're close to, right? And are you close to someone because you guys dislike the same person? Is talking shit about someone your main point of interaction? Is drinking and numbing yourselves your main activity? You have to be wary of these types of interactions, right? Because they lead to pain and more negativity. And I'll relate it back to a work happy hour. Every time I've gone to a work happy hour, those people they act like your friends, right? Okay, let's go out for a happy hour today. And they might as well, they might be, right? I don't want to say this applies to all of them. In my experience, what happens is you go out with a bunch of people from work, and then you drink and you talk shit about other people at work, okay? And you're drinking, you're eating appetizers, you're talking shit about people at work, and that is your only connection, right? And I think that's very frustrating, right? Because I don't want to be doing all negative things. I'm drinking now, which is not negative, but I'm getting drunk. I'm talking negatively about someone that I don't really know, and I'm eating poorly too. Whole negative situation around. I curb those interactions now, right? I'm more aware of the fact that maybe people do have a tendency to do that. Maybe I do have a tendency to do that, but I'm going to rein that in now that I've introspected and self-reflected. So one thing that me and my fiance really have implemented is that if we always we do a postmortem when we come back from any interaction, whether it be a double date, a work event, what have you. If I find myself saying negative things about a person, I immediately say the same number of positive things about that person, because I do not want my fiance and I to have a relationship based on um, judging other people, right? That can't be our main thing. We can do it, but it can't be our main thing. So we stay conscious, we stay present, and this solves many of our issues, and that really leads us to positive interactions. So, we're tying this up here, as when you're present and you're constantly seeing, you're constantly evaluating your actions and your thoughts, you can start to see the underlying causes behind things. So, when people are in pain, let's say, for example, my dad was an angry person growing up. But I realized as I got older that it was because of the poverty, and the tough life that he had coming to America, and like, making survival here caused a lot of this, right? And he was unable to work through that. But now we do, right? I ask him more about what he did when he was younger, how he felt about coming to America all by himself with nothing, right? Like, what were some of the emotions and the feelings you were going through? Let's work through those together. Let's just talk about it at least. Um, but I also realize that it's a journey for him, right? There's going to be limitations. He's not going to be where I am now, in terms of my spiritual journey. I have to be where he is. I have to really relate to him on where he is. Um, so I realize the limitations and I act accordingly. So, what I believe is that we should all self-reflect and be extremely self-aware. So through this, we can no longer be taken by our emotions, but instead we can transform and we can utilize this process as a spiritual experience, right? Everything you do, every interaction you have, use it as a spiritual experience. Um, one thing that I was listening to Joe Rogan, and one thing that he was saying was that we should use eating as a spiritual experience, right? We are very removed from our food and where it comes from and how it's processed and things like that. But imagine if you prepped your food, right? You grew it. And I'm not saying people should, but let's talk about even cooking my food. I definitely have more of a quote unquote spiritual experience when I prepare my own food versus when I buy it outside, right? It takes time to prepare it. So you're not going to be wasteful. You're going to appreciate the ingredients a little bit more, and things like that. So being ever present and alert, I think will carry us through. But that's all I had for today. Feel free to leave me any feedback that you guys might have. I hope you guys have a great week ahead of you. And remember, only positivity. Thanks, guys.